that. Anybody who's ever watched, the David Attenborough series over the years, you'll have been astounded by the enormous variety of life on Earth that we're still discovering, really, from a scientific point of view. And so biodiversity simply encapsulates that. And why does biodiversity matter? Well, humans are a part of biodiversity. We have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years alongside all the other plants and animals in the atmosphere and with the water that exists on Earth. So the human story is very much part of the story of biodiversity. And everything that we really depend upon comes from nature: our food, our clean water, our air, and even the materials that we take for granted that you're surrounded with ultimately have come from nature in some form or another. Now, nature is in enormous trouble, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this talk. But I think it's important to try to understand why this matters to the extent that it does. And sometimes I find ecologists like myself can be saying things like biodiversity is absolutely essential and we depend on it, and people nod in agreement. I've never heard anybody contradict me on that. And you'll also hear people like me saying that nature in Ireland is in a catastrophic state. And yet at the same time, for most of us, our lives are pretty good. We go to the supermarket, the shelves are stuffed. We have an enormous selection of consumer items. And certainly from a material point of view, the lives of the average Irish person has never been better. So certainly there seems to be a contradiction there. And the reason there is this contradiction goes back to our ancestry. And if you could imagine the first people who came to Ireland back perhaps 8,000 or 9,000 years ago, everything they needed in their lives was taken from nature, from quite a small radius around them. Their food, their building materials, their clothing, everything they needed to survive came from a relatively small radius. But what has happened in recent millennia and centuries is that radius has got wider and wider. And so even though today, I'll tell you shortly how nature has been completely destroyed almost in Ireland, the reason we don't feel that is because the radius through which we withdraw resources basically encompasses the entire world. The food we eat, the materials we use come from, sometimes it's very hard even to know where it has come from. But we know, for instance, that our dog food contains possibly seafood from somewhere in the ocean, that the materials in your iPhone or your mobile phone come from mines in countries, perhaps the Congo, who knows. And so this extraction of resources is central to our biodiversity problem. And where we're at today, the reason why we talk about a biodiversity crisis is that global ecosystems are now at risk of collapse. We've gone beyond collapsing our own ecosystems, and we're looking at the collapse of coral reefs, Amazon rainforests, the polar ice caps, these vitally important global ecosystems which are reaching a tipping point. And if that tipping point is reached and we pass a point of no return, human civilization simply can't continue in the way it has. So that's why biodiversity loss is important. Now I'm going to talk about Ireland for 1 or 2 minutes. And now this is really, I'm just skimming over here. I really don't have an enormous amount of time, but so I'm really just going to give you the bare bones of the facts that we have available. And I apologize that this map doesn't show the entire island of Ireland, but I think we're fair to assume that that what this map is trying to predict is similar in Northern Ireland as it is in the Republic. Now, this map comes from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and it is showing us the extent of ancient and long established woodland. Now, a pollen analysis from Ireland and ecologists who have studied this have been able to demonstrate that Ireland, in its natural vegetation cover, is about 80% native forest. But where is that forest? Well, it's not really there anymore. And this map is showing you where the remnants of that forest lie. And it is saying at the end of the caption there, the areas are slightly exaggerated for visual purposes. In other words, they've made these dots bigger so we can actually see them on the map. And that is the extent to which we have removed the natural vegetation cover from Ireland. And that loss of our forest is vitally important. We're beginning to realize that now when we hear discussions about, carbon capture and storage and so on, and people are flabbergasted that we don't have forests in Ireland, or that we don't have climate resilient forests in Ireland. Now, this map doesn't include the 10% of Ireland that is covered in monoculture conifer plantation, and that is because that is not it's not a real forest in an ecological sense of the word, although they are indeed trees. Now, if we were shown this map and we were told this is what's happening in Brazil or this is what's happening in Indonesia, we'd be absolutely horrified at the extent of deforestation. But yet, that is what has happened to our country. And even though that has happened a very long time ago, it's a very relevant problem that we simply have to address. Now, our forests, as I've just said, have gone for a long time, and mostly what replaced our forests was a farmland. And for many centuries, that farmland was quite rich in biodiversity. The soil was healthy. There were ground nesting birds in the fields. The fields were full of insects. There was diversity. There was practically no such thing as pollution in our waterways from farmland, certainly, until the Second World War. And yet things have changed dramatically in that period. Our farmland is no longer a biodiverse place. Typically, our pastures or our croplands are made up of one species. There's typically a lot of chemicals applied to them, whether that is artificial nitrogen or chemicals and herbicides and so on, particularly on tillage land. And that means that there simply isn't the life in farming fields anymore. Ground nesting birds are perhaps to a species practically extinct. And again, this is a problem because there is no resilience left in this land when we're faced with the climate change that is happening. We go to our mountains, and certainly I remember as a child being brought up into the hills around Dublin, and the impression among many people at that time was that, well, this is the wilderness area. This is where we don't have fields and farms, and this is where wild nature is. And this is actually a photograph of the Wicklow Mountains National Park. But this too was a forested landscape once upon a time, and as you can see, it is even more treeless than the lowlands of Ireland. And again, this is a particular problem because these are peatlands, and peatlands are one of the great global stores of carbon. And yet these peatlands are chronically degraded, typically through drainage, through monoculture plantation forestry, overgrazing by animals, particularly sheep, and in some places even deer. And also fires. Yearly now we get, and I would say this weekend, watch out for them. We're already getting reports of fires in our uplands, and that burning obviously is catastrophically damaging to the soil, to the air, to the water, and of course to the biodiversity that used to live in these areas. Now, many of these species are still hanging on, but this landscape in particular in Wicklow, which once was home to nearly all of our characteristic upland birds, basically there's very little living there at the moment. If you go there, you will see maybe Sika deer, which were imported from Japan 100 years ago, and you might see some ravens, and the ravens basically survive on the corpses of sheep and deer that die in the mountains. So this is not a healthy ecosystem. Now, our rivers, which are so vitally important to us for amenity and water supply, as well as protecting our homes and villages from flooding, are in a chronic state of ecological collapse. About half of our rivers are polluted. The main sources of pollution are farming and wastewater treatment plants, or malfunctioning wastewater treatment plants, basically human and animal waste. But also our rivers have been physically modified. For many people, the picture I'm showing you is what your local river looks like. This is the River Boyne in County Meath, and it has been artificially straightened and deepened, and you can see the banks on either side have been raised up with the spoil material in order to protect farmland. These drainage programs were done for the creation of farmland. And it has chronically altered our rivers, so that physical modifications, as it is known, is one of the major drivers of pressure on water status throughout the country. Now, our bogs, I mentioned already, as we know, are vitally important carbon stores. Bogs are particularly interesting because a healthy bog can continue to take carbon out of the air and store it away indefinitely, basically forever. Bogs will keep growing and growing if they are in a healthy state. This is a picture from our one of our Midlands bogs, or what used to be a Midlands bog, and you can see the industrial extraction there. The pie chart on the screen is showing you the full extent of raised bogs when it was first calculated back in the 1970s. And at that stage in the 70s, we calculated that less than a quarter of our bogs, of our raised bogs, these are in the Midland counties, were in a healthy state. And as of the last assessment, which is already out of date, it must be nearly a decade old, the little red sliver there at the top, which is less than 1%, is considered to be in a healthy state, what is referred to as active raised bogs. So our raised bogs have been effectively all but destroyed. Now, we are an island nation. We sometimes forget. We look out at sea. We think, well, at least maybe we have one unspoiled wilderness. But we know also that industrial fishing in particular has destroyed the oceans, and particularly through bottom trawling, which is this practice of dragging a net across the bottom of the sea in order to catch everything. And fisheries in Ireland pretty much have never been managed. And so it has led to a pattern of overexploitation and moving on to the next species, increasing the fishing pressure to try and catch a dwindling resource. And that's an enormous problem because our seas are not in a healthy state. And of course, the ocean covers nearly 3/4 of our planet. And the ocean and the role of the ocean is absolutely central to healthy ecosystems on land and to healthy humans as well. And particularly if you live near the coast, you will know about this.
2 minutes,
of course, pardon?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, fine. And of course, that collapse of ecosystems has led to a disappearance of our biodiversity, and many of our species have gone extinct, and these are a selection of them. And many more of them haven't gone extinct, but have gone from common and widespread to nearly extinct in the space of my lifetime, and I'm not even 50 yet. So that is the state of our biodiversity. Now, in the few moments I have left in this talk, I want to assure you that, depressing as this vista is, solutions are available. And I think the frustrating thing for anybody working in this field over the last decade or so is that the solutions have been available for quite a long time. The science is known, but yet we haven't really acted on it. And of course, this is not unconnected to the other crises we face. And you can see protecting life on land and in the sea is among our sustainable development goals. It's intimately linked to the climate crisis. And we also see that in areas where we have intensive activities, and I put up the example there of fishing, it is related to unsavory social impacts. And this is just a headline about the pretty damning evidence of human slavery on some of our fishing fleet. And so we need to see biodiversity collapse as intimately linked with our own health, the health of our planet, and the health of the living species that we see around us. And in order to get there, we're going to have to see ourselves more as part of this living system rather than as apart from it and dominating it. And that is obviously an ethical challenge. It's not really a scientific challenge. And I'll just leave you with this lovely picture, which imagines a different kind of Irish countryside that has clean water and healthy farms and healthy communities and is brimming with life. And I believe that this kind of a vision is possible if we apply the solutions that we know will work. But obviously that itself is an enormous challenge. So I hope I've given you a flavor there of what the biodiversity crisis is and why it's important.
Thank you, Padraic. And thanks, Padraic. That was perfect. Just so everyone knows, we are collecting questions on the Slido for Padraic. And today is the start of a process. So we're probably going to hear more from experts like Padraic to shape our thinking and build our capacity to engage with the Citizens Assembly. So just to know that the questions that are being asked for Padraic will be answered by the IN through the IN's process to engage the environmental sector. Thanks, Padraic. So we're going to keep moving on now. We have a presentation from Art O'Leary. Art is the Secretary General, Electoral Commission and Citizens Assemblies, and Art was the Secretary of the Constitutional Convention from 2021 to 2014, and as Secretary General to President Higgins from 2014 to 2021. Art, you're very welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here, and I'm exhausted already listening to all the things that you read out that I've done in my life. No wonder I never have any time to myself. It's good to see you all, and delighted to be here. And I'm delighted to see such a big interest in the Citizens Assembly on a directly elected mayor for Dublin. You know, who'd have thought that there was such an interest in local government in this country? So yes, thank you. I know you're here for the Biodiversity Citizens Assembly, and I'm delighted to talk to you about what it might look like. And I might just enter a proviso here first, that everything I might say to you over the next 15 or 20 minutes might be a complete fantasy, because I don't yet have a chair for the Assembly. I don't yet have any membership for the Assembly. So we're a very democratic organization. So the work program and the way things work will all be driven by the members and the chair, et cetera, et cetera. So what I have is a picture in my head of what this might look like. So I suspect it's probably pretty accurate, but oh, sorry, I've lost you all there. But don't be worried if it turns out to be something completely different. Okay. The one thing that won't change with the Citizens Assembly is the terms of reference. I think you've all read them. At this stage, you know what the Citizens Assembly has been asked to do. So it is quite complex, it is quite lengthy. And for those of you who want to familiarize yourselves with the background, there was a debate in 2019 where the Dáil agreed for the first time to establish a Citizens Assembly on biodiversity. And more recently, when they approved the terms of reference in the Dáil and the Seanad. So there was a lot of talk about biodiversity, but also about the other Citizens Assemblies that are coming up or on tracks to be done before the end of the year. There were a couple of changes this time to the way we did things the last time. I've always felt that the way we recruited our citizens was wrong. We used a polling company for the three previous iterations, whose job was basically to turn up in Main Street, Carrick-on-Shannon, and knock on every seventh door until they get a 25-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man. And that in theory sounds fantastic. But the reality was that the person from the polling company knocked on the door and said, I'm looking for a 25-year-old woman. And the person there said, well, nobody here by that. Well, do you know where I can find one? And or there's somebody there who's interested in politics. They might be interested in doing this. And so there were flaws in the way that the recruitment process was managed. So this time, as some of you may know, and I'd be interested in hearing if any of you received an invitation to be a member of the Biodiversity Assembly. No? Or the Dublin Mayor one? Oh, shaking heads for the ones that I can see. But we issued 34,000 invitations to randomly selected households all over the country. And the international comparison is that about 5% of people would apply, would respond saying, yes, I'm willing to give up a number of weekends this year to look at this important issue. So we were expecting something around 1,500 to 1,700 responses. And when registration closed last week, we had 3,700 people had volunteered, which was an extraordinary response. And the academics will be writing about it for some time. So there are a couple of things here. I think what I'd like to take from that particular piece of information is that Irish people understand and like the Citizens Assembly model. They've been through it a few times. It has made some significant changes to the way we live our lives. But also, I'd like to think that they do consider biodiversity loss to be a key issue, and local government in Dublin also to be key issues as well. So, so this is good. The second thing about eligibility for membership is that we opened it up to include all residents of the country and the city of Dublin. So we have, in the previous 3 instances, you had to be on the electoral register to be eligible to vote in a constitutional referendum. But because these issues are a little more diverse and affect everybody and not just voters, the government agreed to extend the eligibility. And I was delighted that we received hundreds of registrations from people from 52 different countries, you know. So this Citizens Assembly will be much more representative of Irish society than any of its predecessors. So we're crunching the numbers at the moment, and we'll be churning out, I mean, there's more complicated maths going on with Excel spreadsheets that I can certainly understand, but in the next couple of days, we will be selecting the members, the 99 members for the Biodiversity Loss Assembly, and a number of standby candidates who fit their identical twin polling characteristics, and we'll be writing to them to ask them to confirm that they'd like to be members and that they can make the meetings which are set out between now and the end of the year. So that's the recruitment. We've got 99 people in the room. We have a couple of things we have to do then is work out a work program. What is it we're going to do? And I mean, I caught the end of Padraic's presentation there, and we do know that biodiversity loss is complicated. And some people in the room are going to be interested in this and will have an interest because that's why they volunteered to take part, but also that some people will have very little knowledge. So we need to present the information to our citizens.
I don't hear this.
Hey, is that okay? Everything okay? Is
Yeah,
everyone
sorry,
hearing that? Or is it just me?
Someone's unmuted, sorry.
Okay, that's all right. So we need to present the information at the beginning as accessibly as we can to define the extent of the crisis, much like what Padraic did in the last slide, because it is multifaceted and it is complicated. And there are lots of different people with their own aspect of biodiversity loss, which they think is the most important, etc. So we need to high-level summary and then drill down to each of the constituent parts. And this is why the first couple of sessions with the 99 citizens will be so important, to try and define the crisis before we get to the challenges, the opportunities, and the possible solutions with this as well. So for this one, I would like to perhaps hold a virtual meeting. Sorry, I should start at the very beginning. The first meeting is going to be with the Dublin Citizens Assembly. It's a joint meeting in Dublin Castle on the 9th of April. So that's where the Taoiseach will address the citizens and tell them how important this job is that they're doing, and to thank them for agreeing to take part. And each of the chairs will set out the vision for the Citizens Assembly as well. After that, I would like to hold at least one virtual meeting with the citizens to try and give them this information and make it as accessible as we can, because people have different learning styles. Some people like to read, some people like to watch or to listen. and others are much more tactile. So I'd also like in the month of June to have a field trip in for the 100 citizens, get them on buses and get them out to see some initiatives that are around the country, the ways of managing biodiversity loss, special area of conservation, some local authority work, or I'd love them to see a farm, for instance. I'd love them to see a bog as well, the opportunities, and so they can have an understanding of some of the solutions to the crisis that face us. So the first couple of months will be spent learning, and I would hope that the real sit down 100 people in a room meetings will happen in September, October and November. We'll have 4 meetings scheduled to take place where the hard work begins, where people like yourselves come in and present directly to the citizens themselves. You know, we have a problem, you know, with the complexity of biodiversity loss. And again, I was delighted to report to talk about being solutions focused, because we need to see what the solutions are, and simply saying we need to give 20 billion euro to this problem to make it go away isn't going to work. You know, it's not going to. The government would like to see, I'm sure, some practical solutions in relation to the state's response, but communities' response and individual responses as well. So let's see what that looked like. But my own experience with the Constitutional Convention, and I know it has been the same with citizens' assemblies all over the world, is that there's no real thing, even as a binary solution, perhaps, because there's no real thing as a binary question when you're talking about this. On even for something as simple as something like, one of the questions we did was the presidential term. Should it be reduced from 7 years to 5 years? And ask 100 people that particular question. You may or may not get an answer, but the answer we got was from the citizens was yes, we should keep it at 7 years, not reduce it to 5 years. But they also made a huge variety of other recommendations on the presidential nomination process, the age of candidacy, campaign spending limits, donations to campaigns, etc., and all of that too. I fully expect that with an issue as big as biodiversity loss, we're going to be swamped with all kinds of issues, and the challenge will be to keep the group focused on the challenge and the opportunities, etc., and become a bit more solutions focused. And you can help as a group, you can help us with that, because you're the people with all the knowledge, you know, and you're the people who can see perhaps the solutions that might be involved here as well. And some of you will get the opportunity to speak directly to the citizenry. Everybody can make submissions, by the way. We will, on the 9th of April, I hope, be calling for submissions. So everybody gets to see everything. We operate full transparency here. And we're hoping that, I mean, anyone who, whether it's a piece of paper or a short video or a voicemail message or whatever it is, there will be no wrong door into the Citizens Assembly. You can come in the front door, the back door, the window, the skylight, whatever. I'm dying to hear from young people in this debate, because young people aren't represented. All the members are going to be over the age of 18. And so the younger people have to have a voice in this debate. So we've set up a separate TikTok channel. So young people hopefully will send us TikTok videos, and we'll make a compilation of them, make them available to the members as well. And we're really going to push the boat out on social media here. So there are the larger groups, traditionally always made quite serious and sometimes academic paper-based submissions, and they're obviously welcome, but we need the other voices as well. So the final thing I would say, because I'm already running out of time, is that we've got an equality of voice issue here as well. Everybody gets to speak. Everybody gets a voice. We're not just hearing from one side of the debate. So I have yet to meet anyone who believes that biodiversity loss doesn't exist, but there may be those who believe that we're already doing enough, and that it's not, there's no need for radical action here as well. this side of the debate will have to be heard too. So it puts pressure on it. I mean, the expert advisory group who will advise the chair, and I see a question earlier on about who's going to chair it. We don't know yet, is the answer. I'm hoping that the chair will be announced before the end of the week, because then at least I'll have somebody to correct my homework. So that'll be nice. So the expert advisory group will present information in as independent a fashion as possible, and then we turn over the debates to advocates on either side. So the 99 will hear all sides of the debate and make up their mind sometime towards the end of the year. The Dáil says we should be done before year end. So we'll have to see how we can manage with that timeline. It's challenging, but it's certainly doable. So that's a high-level summary about what we're all about. So if you'd like to, I'm at your disposal for the next, well, half an hour or so, if happy to take any kind of questions.
Thanks, Art. So we had a survey amongst our participants, and there's questions in there. And also on our Slido, we're upvoting questions to you from your short presentation there. Really comprehensive. Thanks for that, Art. There's some suggestions in the chat for places for your field trip, or considerations for your field trip, and even someone volunteering to be your chair. So I think that was more.
I probably should have said that the meetings are going to be held in the Grand Hotel in Malahide. That was the hotel that that won the right to host. So interestingly, there is a special area of conservation in Malahide there at the estuary, and then the local authority have done some great work out in Turvey and Donabate, which are kind of local, but we'll be happy to consider any options. And if we can't get people on a bus to get to where all these places are, we're going to send a film crew to where these places are and film what it is, and then come back and show the citizens as well. So I terrified the film company that won the tender to record and live stream the proceedings last week by saying, well, that's actually going to be half your work. You'll be traipsing around the highways and byways of the country, filming Hare's Corners and the Burren and whatever else you have to do as well. So we will see how all of that pans out.
Okay, Art, thanks for that. So we'll try and take as many questions as we can. We're going to start with the questions that were submitted in the survey, and some of the IEN staff will ask those. So Catherine, can I ask you to unmute and ask that first question?
Thanks, Art. That was great to hear. So the first question that came in was, how did you decide on what questions the members of the public will be asked to consider? And then also, can members of the public influence those questions which are put to the Assembly?
No, I didn't make it up. Nobody elected me to do anything. The government decided this. It came from the programme for government where the Citizens Assembly came from. So it has its roots there, where when the three parties sat down together to see if they could cobble together a coalition government, one of the issues they agreed on was the establishment of the Citizens Assembly to consider biodiversity loss. And then the government itself, when the time came to do that, they established the terms of reference. Dáil and Shannon approved it. So we've been given our homework already. Our job is just to do it, not to make any changes.
Okay, so I think that was the questions as well that the public will consider within the citizens.
Oh yeah, well they will decide themselves. You know, within the boundaries that have been set by government about what they'd like us to look at and consider. The citizens themselves will drive the work programme. So. One of the challenges I hated when I was in the Constitutional Convention trying to agree a ballot paper on a Sunday morning. And I mean, I've told this story, and I think I told Karen about this the other day as well. So I mean, this story I tell against myself, that in pure frustration one Sunday morning, I said, can we do something completely different this time and answer the question that we were asked? You know, because as I said, I mean, once you open up this topic, it is likely to go in all directions, but it will be driven in the main by the citizens themselves.
Okay. Thanks, Art. Thanks, Catherine. Kaylee, would you like to ask a second question there from the survey?
Sure. So the second one that came in was, what criteria did you use to decide on the composition of the expert panel, and who will be invited to present at the Assembly? Thanks.
We haven't appointed an expert panel yet. I was waiting for the chair to be appointed to go and have a look at that. I mean, for the previous 3 assemblies, it has been the most distinguished academics and practitioners in all the various fields, whether it is academia or law or whatever. These are people with great integrity and huge respect within the various communities and in their own particular fields. I fully expect that the same criteria will be applied here and that nobody will doubt their expertise once they're announced.
Thanks, Art. Thanks, Kaylee. So Karen, can I invite you to ask the next question?
Sure. So the next question that was brought in through the survey is, what's the process for consideration of the submissions, Art? So the person who asked the question noted that certain ones are selected and given to the members of the Citizens Assembly. So they'd like to know, how are they chosen? What criteria will you use to judge them?
Okay.
All the submissions.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And just to nail this at the very beginning, we're all about transparency. Everybody gets to see everything, you know, so there won't be submissions are considered to be more important than others or given greater priority or greater voice within the room. Everybody gets to see everything. Every single submission will be read and made available to all the citizen members. The challenge sometimes is whittling down something like 1,000 submissions to the 3 or 4 groups who get to present directly, who get to be in the room and tell their story to the Assembly. That's where the challenge is. And ultimately, there are 2 barometers used here, and we can take guidance from the expert advisory group here as well, is that we need sufficient breadth in the subject in order to allow the citizens to be best informed, and sufficient depth as well. You know, so the best submissions, there is no doubt about it, will end up speaking directly to the Assembly itself, which is not to say that somebody who is doing something very cool in their small corner of a rural town, village, community, and wants to tell their story, that story will be told, but perhaps not in person in the room.
Thanks, Art. For everyone, if you want to submit a question, we're using Slido to upvote the questions. Megan has just shared that in the chat. We're currently asking the questions that came in through the survey. So Chloe, would you like to ask the next question that came in through the survey?
Yeah, so this person said, I would just like to know how the whole process works, timelines, etc. But more specifically, what happens after the Citizens Assembly is over? Who is presented with the results and whose responsibility is it to act upon them? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a great 2 questions, actually. I would also like to know how it's all going to work as well. As I said, I'm still not sure. But after the Citizens Assembly has done its work and the individuals have tied up the final report, that report will be sent to the Oireachtas and to government, and presumably the Minister responsibility for biodiversity as well, to formulate a response. So this can take months, but not many months, I'm hoping. The government has acted very speedily in the past on issues which they considered to be important. So I'm hoping to have this report written before Christmas, certainly before the end of the year, and submitted to government. And it's up to them then to decide 2 things: how they're going to respond, and also which of the recommendations they're going to accept and implement.
Thanks, Art. And Megan, you're going to ask a question that came in through the survey.
Yeah, I am. So I think you answered a couple of elements of it there, Art. So the one that I just want to drill down on is, in particular, what measures are in place to help ensure that the government does actually address the issues that are raised during the Citizens Assembly by the citizens?
Yeah, it's the perennial question. President Macron has exactly this problem as well, that he's got a report from his 150 Citizens Assembly on climate change, and he simply has no idea what to do with it, you know. So with some of it, I hasten to add, we elect a government and an Oireachtas to legislate, etc. The job we've been asked to do is to consider the issues at some breadth and in some depth and give us our thoughts. The government can choose to accept or not any of these recommendations, but my experience in the past and Ireland's experience in the past has been such that I know that marriage equality and repealing the 8th Amendment are the two prime examples that people use, but the Climate Action Citizens Assembly, their report formed the basis of the current Climate Action Plan and the legislation currently being held out. I mean, the Electoral Commission, which is my next job that after I've done with this one, also came from a recommendation from the Constitutional Convention as well, with huge breadth on education, research, and all of that electoral stuff, which was recommended too. So if we take it seriously, and if the solutions and recommendations are focused and practical and politically acceptable, then there's every chance that the government will accept them. So there is a challenge to us as the Secretariat to the Citizens Assembly is to support and guide the members perhaps to ensuring that some of the recommendations are workable and acceptable to government. But
Thanks,
ultimately, there is no veto. Yeah.
I'll give one more question from the survey, and then we'll start to ask the questions that are coming in on Slido, and they're being upvoted currently. So just a quick one then. What makes a good submission to the Citizens Assembly?
Well, as if you went to car communications for interview practice, and when you have an awful lot to say, they say you should use blot, you know, get your bottom line on top. So if you're sending a substantial document, then a summary and with your bottom line in the introduction. And then if people want to read a little bit further, then they will delve into it. We're all going to read all of them, by the way, but it has to be readable, accessible. I mean, we'll be speaking to our friends in the Adult Literacy Association as well to make sure that some of the jargon that is so familiar to many of you is understandable by the citizens themselves too. So, I mean, like anything else, you know, it's we need people to write clearly and succinctly, and then when they come and see the citizens, to speak clearly and succinctly as well. So it's all about communication of your complex thoughts and ideas in a way that can be understandable from, well, I always use the benchmark of a retired rural postman from West Kerry. So if he can understand it, then anybody can, without dumbing down the conversation itself.
Thanks, Hart. I'll give you one more from the survey, and then I'm going to ask the people on Slido maybe to come in with their observations or questions. So there was a question, will there be regional public consultations, and how will these be incorporated into the Assembly process?
I have no plans for that right now in my head, because the virtual world, that with the one positive thing, if we can call it that emerged from the pandemic, is how easy it is to virtually access anybody you like, including internationally as well. I mean, back in the dark ages in 2013, myself and Tom Arnold, who was chair of the Constitutional Convention, had a road show, and we were like the traveling circus rolling into town, talking about issues relevant to the Constitutional Convention. That won't be necessary now. So there are no plans as things are right now to do that. But again, I'm happy to be guided by the members if they have a strong view that we need to go and do something somewhere in particular, then we'll try and build that into the schedule as well.
Thanks, Art. So we've still got 10-15 minutes left with Art. So I'm going to invite people to be succinct if I invite them in. So Elaine McGough, would you like to unmute and maybe make your observation to Art?
Yep, thanks, Davy, and thanks, Art. And my observation was I really, really like the idea of bringing people on a field trip. I think it would just be, it would be so visceral for them to be able to see it. But my recommendation would be that you don't just go to the nice places, that you show them, say, a cut over bog, and then this is what it's meant to look like, and bring them to an intact bog, just so they can really like compare and contrast. Because I know that a lot of people, when they look at the Irish countryside and they see green fields and they think it's wonderful, but once you once they see the damage, they can't unsee it. So I think it would just be really useful to make sure that they are seeing what we see when we look at it.
Oh, I agree entirely, and the challenge is that what we have here is an oil tanker, that's not easily turned around or moved anywhere. So yeah, getting 100 people on buses is difficult. I love the idea of that, and I'm keen, but my email address, and I might regret this, but is art.o'leary@citizensassembly.ie. If you want to send me some suggestions about places where we should go to see very positive initiatives and things that work well, and some habitats which have been destroyed or are likely to be destroyed if we don't start doing something, then I'd be very happy to look at that. If we can't get everyone to see it, then we'll certainly send the film crew and film it, because I think some of that visual aspect, as you said, is very powerful. This has never been done before with the Citizens Assembly, but it's something I felt is an initiative that we should certainly try, because I think it will work, So, but if we send a film crew to record it, I mean, it's not going to be David Attenborough, but it will be good enough for people to understand.
Great, thanks, Art. There's two anonymous ones. Hopefully they've not been asked, but I'll ask them again. Art, will the info being presented to the Citizen Assembly be made available to the public? I think you have said.
Yeah, absolutely. Full transparency. All the meetings will be streamed live. All of even when we're out recording the site field trip, we're going to record those as well and put them on our YouTube channel. And we'll put little snippets on TikTok and Instagram and everywhere. So everybody gets to see everything. You don't have to be in the room to be able to see.
And then another quick one. How do the NGO national experts on biodiversity get to the evidence-based presentation stage?
Well, again, we'll be guided in that regard. Do the NGO experts, do they want to come in and advocate for a position? Is that the question? Or do they want to wear an independent hat and present factual information as well? I don't get the essence of the question, but if an NGO who is advocating for a particular position, they will be asked to come in on our what might be an advocates weekend, where we listen to all sides of the debate, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to invite Lorcan Scott in, if you want, Lorcan, just to maybe ask or make your observation.
Hello, yes. Sorry, I've been keeping up with the chat now. Oh yeah, I just made an observation that maybe this is already agreed, but that whatever findings come from the Youth Assembly, that they would get an opportunity to present to the Citizen Assembly their thoughts and feelings in advance of any discussion.
Oh yeah, no, you're dead right, Lorcan, and I should have mentioned that earlier, in that there is, because there are no under 18s in the membership, that there is a Youth Assembly looking at this particular issue, and we're going to have a special session for the Youth Assembly to come directly in and present their findings as well. So it's really important that the young people have a very strong voice in this debate.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. There's someone asking, how was the Citizens Assembly advertised? Were the PPNs advised to share through their networks?
No. If you mean how were the people invited to be members, we randomly selected 34,000 households from the 1.6 million on the geodirectory database held by On Post. So they're completely anonymous. We don't know the names of individuals. We just have 34,000 addresses to say, listen, please deliver this to the householder at 34 Main Street, Carrick-on-Shannon. And then from that number, we have now 3,700 possible members to play with.
Okay. Justin, you have a question in the Slido. Do you want to unmute and maybe just ask that?
Thanks, Lorcan. Hi, Art. I'm just wondering. Hi. I'm just wondering, is the marine environment going to be included in the work of the Assembly?
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, we're an island nation, and I think, as a huge fan of the sea myself, I think it is an important aspect of what it is we have to look at. Yes.
Great, because it's under as much pressure as the land environment is, and probably more precious.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks.
Maria Cullen, your question is similar. Do you want to just unmute and ask that, if you're there?
Hi, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you very much. I often feel that some of the bigger species and the cute ones, and they deserve to be considered too, are taken into account often maybe out of proportion. But could all biodiversity groups be taken into account? So the need to consider in Ireland, particularly vast biological groups with huge numbers of species that aren't normally, like insects and some of the fungi. All of the fungi are very overlooked, I think. But I would say that.
I agree entirely. To be honest, when and Hans Zomer will remember this, when we were at the Oris in the last couple of years, there was a biodiversity audit of the grounds at Oris and Uachtaráin, and Collie Ennis from Trinity did an extraordinary job looking at things like spiders and all the things that we don't always like to look at. I should probably declare an interest. I'm a member of Birdwatch Ireland, and if you follow my Twitter feed, you'll probably see all of these cute and cuddly species that Maria mentioned there as well. So I'm a bird fan, but
and we did a little list one time, Art, as well, of Oris and Uachtaráin years ago, of the lichens on the trees and rocks in the ground. So we can make that available too if you need it. But thank you very much.
You must be great fun at parties, you know. So
not so you can ask around this group. I don't think so, but thank you very much for addressing.
Welcome.
Okay, just a quick one, Art. You did say that the 9th of April is when the call for submissions will be made, but someone's asking, where will the public submissions be advertised? Where will we hear that?
There'll be a big launch, to be a press statement as well, and it'll be on our website, it'll be in the newspapers, it'll be all over social media as well. And so you don't have to be ready on the 10th of April to submit, by the way. We will be doing a huge amount of fact gathering and information, etc. But as I said, the rubber will hit the road sometime in, let me see if I just have a squint at my whiteboard. Sometime towards the end of September is when we're going to get the 99 in the room. So if you want to take the time, take a couple of months to present, to perfect your submission. But we're available from the 10th of September, but we'll be accepting submissions right up until September as well. So don't be killing yourself. It's better to do this properly than quickly.
And maybe just a final one, just to reiterate, it's still been asked, what is the timeline for the consideration? So we have the submissions from the 9th of April and probably the actual assembly in September. Is there any other milestones that we need to be aware of, Art?
Yeah, the hard deadline to finish is the end of the year. So a report must be written before Christmas, unless something happens, catastrophic happens. We'd have to go back then and get permission from the Oireachtas to extend. But as things stand right now, I think it's an ambitious target, but I think it's something we can meet with the willingness of the participants. They need to understand themselves, I mean, what they're signing up to. I mean, there's no point in our citizens signing up to whatever it is, 8 months of hard work to discover that, whoa, it's a year and 8 months. But the hard deadline right now is the end of the year. So final report is before Christmas.
Okay, we've still got a few minutes with Art, so I'm going to invite people to actually put their hands up and just ask. I think I've went through the main ones that were for Art in the Slido. Keith from Dalgany, please ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much for doing this. It's been a long time coming. I think you may have mentioned, or at least it's worth mentioning, it was committed 3 years ago when we declared climate and biodiversity emergency. The second half of that motion actually committed to do this biodiversity assembly, and it's very welcome. And I'd like to just come back to something. You said it's not necessary to go out on the road shows. I would take issue with that. It's absolutely necessary. There are 100 of us on this call, and there are about 400 more who are into this, who have been waiting for this and agitating for this for years. However, there are 5 million people that are paying absolutely no attention to this. And they are in every local community and every local town and every local forest in the country. And they care hugely about their biodiversity locally, but they have no idea that this is happening. And unless we make an effort to go out to every community, and we do have a PPN, and we do have a county council, and we do have municipal districts, so we have the capability to do that. And these people care, they're just not connected, and there's a risk. If we don't do a huge outreach, we will be congratulating ourselves that a little group of us have done something good. And most of Ireland who care about all the biodiversity will have been missed.
Thanks, Keith.
Okay, I hear you loud and clear. And it's certainly a perspective we'll have to have a look at. Thank you for the comment. Yeah,
Natasha, then Irene, and as succinct as you can.
Hi, sorry, a great presentation. Thank you, Art. I just want to talk about land use and wondering if there'll be presentations on just transition. You know, we have a dialogue, or I don't know what you call it, but every time people mention the environment, another group mentions jobs. And if we don't include just transition and how we can orientate the solutions where biodiversity wins, but so do the people. And I wonder that those kind of presentations need to be made because for example, farming, there's going to be, anyway, I think you get the point. I don't know.
Yeah. That's fine. The point is well made, and it will certainly be part of the discussion.
Thanks. Irene?
Thanks, and thanks, Art, as well. The question that I posed was, I was wondering if those gathered at the Citizens Assembly would be given a briefing on economics and how that has influenced biodiversity in Ireland. So, for example, from the farming community, farmers are often forced to farm intensively and unsustainably because it's the only thing that they can profit from, given current subsidies and how producers aren't paid what they should be. So that's just one example, but economics has caused the biodiversity crisis, in my opinion. So I was just wondering if the Assembly would be briefed on that.
Yeah. Actually, there's thank you for the question. It's such an interesting one because I think there are two sides of economics here. You know, there is the microeconomics, which, as you say, impacts hugely on the way that farmers continue with their business model. But there's also the big state economics, the macro stuff too, you know, and where the citizens should be aware of the government's priorities as well. It's something that the Taoiseach mentioned as a criticism of the Citizens Assembly model after the gender equality debate, you know, is that when you get 100 people in a room, then they become very focused on the thing that they're looking at, and they to the exclusion of all else, you know. So I'm hoping this time that we will have a two-sided micro and macroeconomic debate as well, where the government can talk, we'll get somebody from government in to talk about well, the state of the state's finances, you know, and talk about the big picture stuff and talk about priorities. And if we spend money on hospitals, then we can't spend money on other things, etc., just to give people a sense of what might be involved here.
Thank you so much.
But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Art. Art, can you spend another 10 minutes with us? We're going to move into Oisín Coghlan, but we want to get a picture with everyone and you. So if you can spend another 10 minutes with us, and then we're going to take a group picture. So thanks again, Art. Thanks everyone for the questions. Again, this is the start of a process for the environmental sector, and this afternoon we'll go real into the planning and thinking about our submissions and messaging. So I'm going to hand over now to Oisín. Oisín, thanks for joining us. Oisín is just going to give some reflections and learnings on engaging with Citizens Assembly. So Oisín, over to you.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, David?
Yes,
yeah,
sorry.
okay.
I can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, you should be able to see me as well, but I'm in twice because I'm standing in the corner of a conference center. So there is one of me that has a a video, but it's not the one that's speaking. Sorry. So look, thanks for inviting me to speak, and I'm sorry I can't be there for the whole of it. I'm at the National Climate Stakeholder Forum, and which actually is instructive in itself. And as most of you know, I'm not a biodiversity expert at all, and I've been asked to speak today because of just to share our experience of working on the climate Citizens Assembly, the Citizens Assembly that dealt with climate 5 years ago now almost. To share our experience of that, as there may be some lessons for the environmental civil society sector as we engage now with this one, although there may also be some differences that are worth reflecting on. So the first point I'd make is that there's no automatic link between having a citizen assembly and having policy change, even though we get excited about citizens assemblies because of the high profile examples of where they have led to really significant policy change, indeed social change, but policy change on the back of that in Ireland. So we all know about the Constitutional Convention that Art was involved with that led to the marriage equality referendum. And the same Citizens Assembly that did climate also did abortion care, and huge change followed there too. And there has been really significant change in climate policy as a result of the same citizens deliberating over 2 weekends only in that case. They did 6 on abortion, they did 2 on climate, but it had a really significant change. But for all of those ones that we know about, there's quite a lot of other issues, which I can't even remember myself, which have not resulted in policy change. So for example, that same Citizens Assembly that did climate and abortion also did the challenges of an aging society, and also did, I think, something to do with what age the president should be when they're elected. And Art's Constitutional Convention did lots of other issues, not many of which have come to fruition, I think, including voting age, for example. So it's just to remember that it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get change, so it's an opportunity, not a guarantee, I guess, is what I would be underlining at this point. The other point I would say around the fact that it's an opportunity is our work here, I think, as civil society is not just to try to influence the outcome in terms of the recommendations through our inputs. I think it is a broader moment than that. And someone actually who was speaking just there, it might have been Keith, I'm not sure, who said that for all of us who are here today, and and the other 100 who might have liked to come, there's hundreds of thousands who aren't very engaged. And because citizen assemblies now have a certain profile in Ireland, it is a moment where there's a significant chance to get the issues around biodiversity loss and the appropriate response to that and the emergency we face higher up. Not just the public or the policy agenda, but actually the public mind, the engaged citizens, and indeed the broader citizenship through the media. And we need to grasp that opportunity. So, for example, one of the things that the civil society sector did around climate is that, to a significant degree, we were cheerleaders for the assembly. Of course, we made our submissions to the public consultation, and we were observers during the day. We didn't actually get to speak at that. That's going to be different this time. Advocates will get to speak. But while obviously we wanted to give the citizens the information they needed for their deliberations, they were only one of our advocacy targets, for want of a better word. And of course, there was no direct advocacy of the citizens. They were left to do the deliberations. But it was a platform for the broader communications and advocacy to Irish society. And it was an opportunity for movement building. It is a very obvious hook or moment, or target's the wrong word, but like opportunity for us to get lots of other people who do care about biodiversity to express why they care and what they care about and what they want done, because there's a chance they're going to be listened to. I mean, that's what's made the Citizens Assembly different, in that many of us have done endless public consultations and felt that they disappeared down a black hole, whereas the Citizens Assembly are deliberate in public effectively. I mean, their deliberations are private, but the outcomes are very public and the process is very transparent. And that's an opportunity for lots of people to be heard on biodiversity. So it is an opportunity for us to engage with all our constituencies and beyond the public to say, look, if you've been frustrated or care about biodiversity over years or decades, or if you've thought about it for the first time, during the pandemic and connected with your local wildlife and nature during the pandemic, now is the moment to speak up for nature, because there's a chance more often than in other forms of engagement with the state for you to be heard and for change to happen. So it is a profile for the cause, a moment, and it is a movement building opportunity for us and for all our allies. And of course, then the other parties, we do want to inform and influence the actual conclusions, the actual recommendations that the Assembly makes to the Oireachtas and the government. And here's something on that I would make the following point. And in a couple of conversations we've had so far about this, Padraic from the Irish Wildlife Trusts, we've had a dialogue about this, because there's a what do we want the Assembly to do? Do we have to go back over old ground? What can we take for granted? And then does it go off into another Oireachtas committee? And I would say that there may be new ideas generated. There may be innovation. The citizens, when they get together and get going, they could come up with all sorts of solutions. But for us, I wouldn't be afraid of saying the same things as we've been saying for years. And there's no obligation on us to say new things because it's a new audience or a new moment, because those things haven't been done. And if those things had been done, we would have less biodiversity loss. So there's an old saying about electoral campaigns that until you are physically sick of repeating your slogans and your mantras and your policy positions, until you're physically sick, it's unlikely that the public have actually heard. So we shouldn't shy away from just repeating the big ideas and the small ideas and the recommendations we've had for decades, because now there's a chance that they will get heard by an audience that wasn't previously engaged or needed to be engaged, given a fairer hearing than they have been given so far, and been given then the mandate or the authority of the blessing of the Citizens Assembly. And it is therefore the idea being it's harder for the state to ignore an expertly informed and supported Citizens Assembly. It's harder for the state to ignore their recommendations than it is to ignore the recommendations of environmental civil society, which they've ignored for 30 years since Rio, if not long before. So, and then just a few in the couple of minutes remaining, just to and I know Art's here, so I'll say this with him here too. Like the key elements of the Citizens Assembly that we won't have an opportunity to influence all of these things. Some of them are not our bailiwick, but to be conscious of. One is who's on that expert group that Art's assembling, like who's helping shape the process and shape the questions and the way that the information that the citizens will be given to feed their deliberations. Who's providing the grist for their mill, so to speak, and hopefully that will be an expert and diverse group in itself to really feed their deliberations, to spark their deliberations. And then there is an issue around the framing. In the case of the climate one, it was how to make the state a leader in tackling climate change. This I think is the what the state's response should be to biodiversity loss and what the response should be. So there's questions around, we need to keep an eye on those framing, not just of the big question, but of the individual way that's broken down. And to make sure that, for example, that this issue of the fact of how bad things are is well taken into account, but then also that there's a solutions focus, which I'm sure there will be. And then that's obviously very important, the balance of witnesses that come before the Assembly, and it's good to hear that Art say that there will be a space for advocates. But obviously we want it to be expert driven, because we've had lots of back and forths in front of the public, in front of the media and in front of the politicians between interest groups, some of whom are vested interests, they have money at stake in how things are done now, and some of whom, like us, are public interest groups who don't have money at stake, we have issues at stake. But often the politicians and the public don't distinguish between those. So actually a deliberative process should distinguish between those who have skin in the game and therefore have a reason to advance an agenda, and those of us who are trying to advance science-based, evidence-based reasoning for why we should act in a different way to the way we have been acting. So that balance of witnesses and how they're presented is important. And I think I've heard that there's going to be field trips. I think that's amazingly important, that they go and see. I would say that they don't just go and see like small positive solutions now, because there's a risk that they may not be scalable. They do need to also see the bad stuff, to have an understanding of how challenging the situation is now, so that the solutions are at scale. And one question about the outcomes, we need to keep an eye on the outcomes too, that they are that they're radical and that they are adequate to the situation, but that they're plausible, that they aren't sort of easily knocked down afterwards as just being impossible to or impractical to do. So they need to be radical instead of being practical. And finally, just to keep an eye, we do need to keep an eye on what happens afterwards. And here there's an issue here too, in that this may be where it's different to climate. In climate, we'd had an action plan the same year as the Citizens Assembly was started, it came out, but it was really bad. So there's an opportunity to kind of reject that and to move on to something new. This time, and so we were okay to go through a whole new process with the Assembly and then the Joint Oireachtas Committee. This time, the Joint Oireachtas Committee is working now. The government's doing an action plan now. So we will have to see how does the outcomes of this process interact with ongoing policy making, and do we have to wait another 2 years for the Oireachtas Committee to debate next year on the outcomes of the Assembly before it's put up to the government to act on the recommendations of the Assembly. So we need to tease out how best to advocate and campaign around the outcomes of the Citizens Assembly, assuming that we think they're fantastic, how we get those turned into policy. And that's it.
Thank you, Oisín. That was really informative. Thanks, Art, there as well. We're going to take a group picture, so I'll remove the spotlight from Oisín. And Kylie, you want to just quickly introduce this. We're on the last few minutes now. We're finishing at 12:30 sharp. We're still going to have a little input from the survey. Kaylee, what are we doing with this picture?
Hi, everybody. So thanks to all our speakers so far. So what I'm going to be doing is, if you would not like your picture to be taken, you can take yourself off video here. I'm going to take a couple screen grabs, if that's all right with everybody. And I will let you know when I'm taking them. I'm just setting myself up here. I'll give everybody like a minute, maybe, to turn their camera off. A couple seconds.
A minute? Seconds.
Not a minute, a second. That was ambitious. Okay. Right, everybody ready? I'm going to do the first one now.
Smile.
So I'm going to wait. If people don't mind, don't put anything into the chat if you don't mind, just because it's going to pop up in for the photo. Okay. Great. Gonna do one more. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Art, and
welcome. Just before you finish, can I introduce my colleague who I've noticed is in the room as well, Tim Carey, who's with me on the Citizens Assembly and the Electoral Commission as well. He's a man of many talents. And just so I don't have to shoulder this burden alone, tim.carey@citizensassembly.ie. He has a much greater laser-like focus than me. So you are likely to get a response from Tim in a way that I'm easily distracted looking at the window at little birds. So you might bear that in mind as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Thanks, Tim. And well, let's finish this session. So we're going to just hear from Chloe, who's working at the IN office on the survey, some reflections from the survey, some themes and general patterns. Over to you, Chloe.
Thank you so much. Megan, are you? Yeah, thank you. So thank you everyone for filling out the survey. We had 73 responses, which was really great from all over the country. So first of all, we sort of summarized some questions just based on value judgments on the biodiversity crisis. And we found that only 9.5% of respondents here responded that somewhat or strongly agree that the biodiversity crisis and the solutions needed it are indeed receiving the attention they deserve. So we see that an overwhelming majority of respondents, 83.5%, disagree. So we need more attention on biodiversity. In the same line, 83.6% of respondents agreed that Ireland should be implementing legally binding measures to address the biodiversity emergency, and only 50% disagreed with that statement. If I could have the next slide, please, Megan. We also asked some questions overall on the Citizens Assembly as a process and people's familiarity with it. Only 15.1% considered themselves very familiar with the process of a Citizens Assembly. Hopefully with Art here today, it was a little bit cleared up. But what's good is that 54.8% did say that they were somewhat familiar. Along the same theme, 71.2% of respondents said that they would be very or somewhat confident to submit an evidence-based submission to a public consultation on biodiversity, which was really great. And a similar majority, 60.3% of respondents also said that they were likely to put in a submission to the Citizens Assembly on biodiversity from this group, with an additional 28.8% that were said that they were somewhat likely. If I could have the next slides. Can I have the next slide, please, Megan?
I'm going to stop here and share because it's not translating.
Right, amazing, thank you. And as you know, if you filled out the survey, we asked a few other questions, and from that we pulled out what some of the key issues were that were identified. So there was habitat and species loss, the lack of profound and/or specific understanding of biodiversity issues, both at a governance and individual or public level, poor use of funds for biodiversity projects, an overall lack of diversity, and there was an identified need for native species. And there was also an identified inability to enforce laws or measures put in place, and an overall not keeping up with goals and directives. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks for that. And thanks for everyone that completed the survey as part of our process to gather the environmental sector's inputs to the Citizens Assembly on biodiversity. So I just want to frame a little of what we're going to do in session 2 this afternoon. So we're taking a break, we're coming back at 2 o'clock, and we're really now starting to prepare. So we really want to look at the sort of domains or areas that we might get messaging or submissions around. We've got some people holding some breakout spaces. We'll start the session just agreeing these spaces. Megan is about to put them up where we're at just now with it. We want to keep a little space for emergence. So we've got some people that will introduce the idea of a well-being and well-being economy and biodiversity, the law on biodiversity, water and biodiversity, rewilding and biodiversity, communities and resilience and biodiversity, agriculture, climate, local authorities. That could include PPNs as well. Potentially it keeps coming up in the chat. And we've got a bit of an open space that we will look to see if there were any areas that any of us are holding. So we had 100 people this morning. Hopefully we can continue that this afternoon as our next stage in this process. Today isn't the end of our process. Today is the start of our process. So we are planning a blended face-to-face and virtual meeting later in the next month or 2 months. So we'll come back and look for clarity around who wants to go to the breakouts, how you get into the breakouts, and just agree on those topics at 2 o'clock. But I'll hand over to my co-facilitator, Megan, for some final words here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Davey. I just saw a little question come in saying, do we only go to one breakout? No, they're roving discussions. It's a roving brainstorm, roving discussions. So you can move to as many breakout rooms as you like in the time that we have. But I'll explain that a bit more in detail in at the beginning of the next session. So I think we have like a really good opportunity now. There's almost 100 of us on a call, and it would be a shame for all of us to just go away for an hour lunch and not make use of the fact that we're all here. So what I would like to suggest is that we have like a little bit of space over lunch, if you like, to just join a breakout session and just discuss this question. So what are your organization's specific campaigning asks related to biodiversity? So we just get to really share with one another. So I'll put in a link for a Slido to be able to do that, but it would be lovely to have that actually, you know, face-to-face in a breakout session. So I'll open up a breakout room. We're going to have that open from 12:30 to 1:15. So then that's a whole 45 minutes afterwards to go off and have some alone time or whatever you need. And if we need more than one breakout room, I'll facilitate that as well. So no obligation, but it just would be nice to share with one another. So I'll stop sharing now, and I'll put the link to the Slido in, and I'm just going to change the question to that campaigning question. So make sure to do that over the break, regardless of whether you join the breakout room or not.
Brilliant, Megan. And maybe just to thank you all for attending this morning, and especially to Padraic, Art O'Leary and Oisín for those interventions and helping us shape our thinking and learning how we might best engage in the Citizens Assembly. So we'll see you after the break. Hopefully some of you will stay in the break with Megan's invitation. But at 2 o'clock we'll be starting to prepare. How do we prepare our submissions? And as Oisín said, how do we build our movement, the opportunity to message around this assembly as well. So thanks everyone. See you this afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, Art. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.